Muammar al-Gaddafi joined the military and staged a coup to seize control of Libya in 1969, ousting King Idris. Though his Arab nationalist rhetoric and socialist-style policies gained him support in the early days of his rule, his corruption, military interference in Africa, and record of horrific human rights abuses turned much of the Libyan population against him. Accused of supporting terrorism, in the last decade of his rule Gaddafi reached a rapprochement with Western leaders, and Libya became a key provider of oil to Europe. During the Arab Spring of 2011, NATO troops supported dissidents attempting to overthrow Gaddafi's government. After months on the run, on October 20, 2011, he was killed in his hometown of Sirte. Muammar al-Gaddafi was born on June 7, 1942, in Sirte, Libya. Raised in a Bedouin tent in the Libyan desert, he came from a tribal family called the el-Gaddafi. At the time of his birth, Libya was an Italian colony. In 1951, Libya gained independence under the Western allied King Idris. As a young man Gaddafi was influenced by the Arab nationalist movement, and admired Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. In 1961 Gaddafi entered the military college in the city of Benghazi. He also spent 4 months receiving military training in the United Kingdom. After graduating, Gaddafi steadily rose through the ranks of the military. As disaffection with Idris grew, Gaddafi became involved with a movement of young officers to overthrow the king. A talented and charismatic man, Gaddafi rose to power in the group. On September 1, 1969, King Idris was overthrown while he was abroad in Turkey for medical treatment. Gaddafi was named Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, Libya's new ruling body. At age 27, he had become the ruler of Libya. Gaddafi's first order of business was to shut down the American and British military bases in Libya. He also demanded that foreign oil companies in Libya share a bigger portion of revenue with the country. Gaddafi replaced the Gregorian calendar with the Islamic one, and forbade the sale of alcohol. Feeling threatened by a failed coup attempt by his fellow officers in December 1969, Gaddafi put in laws criminalizing political dissent. In 1970, he expelled the remaining Italians from Libya and emphasized what he saw as the battle between Arab nationalism and Western imperialism. He vocally opposed Zionism and Israel, and expelled the Jewish community from Libya. Gaddafi's inner circle of trusted people became smaller and smaller, as power was shared by himself and a small group of associates. His intelligence agents traveled around the world to intimidate and assassinate Libyans living in exile. In these early days, Gaddafi sought to orient Libya away from the West and towards the Middle East and Africa. He involved the Libyan military in several foreign conflicts, including in Egypt and Sudan, and the bloody civil war in Chad. In the mid-1970s, Gaddafi published the first volume of the Green Book, an explanation of his political philosophy. The 3-volume work describes the problems with liberal democracy and capitalism, and promotes Gaddafi's policies as the remedy. Gaddafi claimed that Libya boasted popular committees and shared ownership, but in reality this was far from true. Gaddafi had appointed himself or close family and friends to all positions of power, and their corruption and crackdowns on any kind of civic organizing meant much of the population lived in poverty. Meanwhile, Gaddafi and those close to him were amassing fortunes in oil revenue while the regime murdered those it deemed as dissidents. Gaddafi's ruling style was not just oppressive, it was eccentric. He had a cadre of female bodyguards in heels, considered himself the king of Africa, erected a tent to stay in when he traveled abroad, and dressed in strange costume-like outfits. His bizarre antics often distracted from his brutality, and earned him the nickname, the Mad Dog of the Middle East. In addition to his destructive rule at home, Gaddafi was despised by much of the international community. His government was implicated in the financing of many anti-Western groups around the world, including some terror plots. The Irish Republican Army allegedly had links to Gaddafi. Because of the regime's links to Irish terrorism, the United Kingdom cut off diplomatic relations with Libya for more than a decade. In 1986, Libyan terrorists were thought to be behind the bombing of a West Berlin dance club that killed 3 and injured scores of people. The United States in turn, under President Ronald Reagan's administration, bombed specific targets in Libya that included Gaddafi's residence in Tripoli. In the most famous instance of the country's connection to terrorism, Libya was implicated in the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. A plane carrying 259 people blew up near Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all on board, with falling debris killing 11 civilians on the ground. Libyan terrorists, including an in-law of Gaddafi's, were also believed to be behind the destruction of a French passenger jet in 1989, killing all 170 on board. In 1990s, the relationship between Gaddafi and the West began to thaw. As Gaddafi faced a growing threat from Islamists who opposed his rule, he began to share information with the British and American intelligence services. In 1994, Nelson Mandela persuaded the Libyan leader to hand over the suspects from the Lockerbie bombing. It wasn't long before Gaddafi had mended relations with the West on many fronts. Gaddafi was welcomed in Western capitals, and Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi counted him among his close friends. Gaddafi's son and heir apparent, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, mixed with London's high society for several years. Many critics of the newfound friendship of Gaddafi and the West believed it was based on business and access to oil. In 2001, the United Nations eased sanctions on Libya, and foreign oil companies worked out lucrative new contracts to operate in the country. The influx of money to Libya made Gaddafi, his family and his associates even wealthier. The disparity between the ruling family and the masses became ever more apparent. After more than 4 decades in power, Gaddafi's downfall happened in less than a year. In January 2011, the Tunisian revolution forced out longtime dictator Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali and set off the Arab Spring. The next month, Egyptian ruler Hosni Mubarak was forced out, providing a morale boost to protesters in several Arab capitals. Despite the atmosphere of severe repression, demonstrations broke out in the city of Benghazi and spread throughout Libya. Gaddafi used aggressive force to try to suppress the protests, and the violence quickly escalated. Police and foreign mercenaries were brought in to shoot at protesters, and helicopters were sent to bombard citizens from the air. As casualties mounted, Libyans grew more determined to see Gaddafi's ouster. As violence spread through the country, Gaddafi made several rambling speeches on state television, claiming the demonstrators were traitors, foreigners, al-Qaeda and drug addicts. He urged his supporters to continue the fight, and small groups of heavily armed loyalists battled against the rebels. By the end of February 2011, the opposition had gained control over much of the country, and the rebels formed a governing body called the National Transitional Council. The opposition surrounded Tripoli, where Gaddafi still had some support. Most of the international community expressed support for the NTC and called for the ouster of Gaddafi. At the end of March, a NATO coalition began to provide support for the rebel forces in the form of airstrikes and a no-fly zone. NATO's military intervention over the next 6 months proved to be decisive. In April, a NATO attack killed one of Gaddafi's sons. When Tripoli fell to rebel forces in late August, it was seen as a major victory for the opposition and a symbolic end for Gaddafi's rule. In June 2011, the International Criminal Court issued warrants for the arrest of Gaddafi, his son Saif al-Islam, and his brother-in-law for crimes against humanity. In July, more than 30 countries recognized the NTC as the legitimate government of Libya. Gaddafi had lost control of Libya, but his whereabouts were still unknown. On October 20, 2011, Libyan officials announced that Gaddafi had died near his hometown of Sirte, Libya. Early reports had conflicting accounts of his death, with some stating that he had been killed in a gun battle and others claiming that he had been targeted by a NATO aerial attack. Video circulated of Gaddafi's bloodied body being dragged around by fighters. For months, Gaddafi and his family had been at large, believed to be hiding in the western part of the country where they still had small pockets of support. As news of the former dictator's death spread, Libyans poured into the streets, celebrating what many hailed as the culmination of their revolution. Post-Gaddafi, Libya has continued to be embroiled in violence, with state authority eventually being held by the General National Congress. Various militia groups have vied for power. Dozens of political figures and activists in Benghazi have been killed, with many having to leave the area. The country has also seen a succession of interim prime ministers.